Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really getting stuck into something huge, intellectually speaking. One of the most famous and maybe most misunderstood concepts from Carl Jung.
That's right, the collective unconscious.
Exactly. We've got your source materials here, the articles, historical bits, modern critiques. And our job, really, is to give you that psychological shortcut you need. We're exploring this idea that part of your mind deep down isn't really about your life experiences at all. It's something inherited, something built up over the entire history of, well, humanity.
Precisely. And when Jung first put a name to it, collectives, unbewusstes, that's the term he used, with this universal layer. It's not personal.
Right.
It's a repository deep within us all. And it's not just, shared cultural things. He meant something innate, made up of basic human instincts and, maybe most famously, the Jungian archetypes.
Archetypes. We'll definitely get into those.
Yeah, these pre-existing forms, universal symbols, things we're basically born understanding how to recognize on some level.
Okay, so that's our mission for this deep dive. We're going to define the key parts, archetypes, instincts. We'll look at the evidence Jung used, especially that big aha moment he had in the clinic.
The Mithras case, yeah.
And really importantly, we've got to tackle the critiques, the big questions about whether the stuff is truly inherited or if it's more about, shared environments, nature versus nurture, essentially.
It's a crucial distinction.
So let's unpack this whole framework. And I think we have to start where Jung himself started to diverge, right? The break with Freud.
Absolutely fundamental. Freud's whole world was pretty much the personal unconscious.
Right. That's where all your specific stuff goes, the memories you forgot, desires you pushed down, your unique hang-ups and traumas.
Exactly. Your personal baggage, so to speak. But for Jung, that just wasn't enough. It didn't explain everything he was seeing.
You thought it was too shallow.
In a way, yes. He felt the personal unconscious was just the surface layer, like a thin film. He proposed this whole second psychic system, much deeper, much older. And this system, the collective unconscious, it underlies everything personal. It surrounds it. And crucially, it's universal. It's the same in me and you and someone from a completely different culture, different time.
Regardless of education background.
Irrelevant. Even personal neuroses don't change that fundamental layer. It's impersonal.
Okay, that is a really radical shift, because if that collective layer is real, it completely knocks down the whole idea of the mind as a tabula rasa.
Oh, absolutely.
Destroys it.
The blank slate idea, just gone.
Completely. The core idea here is that your individual mind isn't just shaped by experience, it's heavily, heavily influenced by these inherited predispositions.
So not learned behavior we all pick up, but actual inherited structures. Yes. Jung wasn't talking about, things we learn together as a society. He meant inheriting the actual psychic life, the mental framework of our ancestors. He literally said it comprises the psychic life of our ancestors right back to the earliest beginnings.
Wow. That sounds pretty mystical when you put it like that, which might be why some modern folks use different terms.
That's true. You hear terms like autonomous psyche or objective psyche used more often in analytical psychology today, where you're trying to ground it a bit more, make it sound less out there.
Yeah, makes sense. And we should probably clarify this is not the same as collective consciousness, right?
Oh, completely different. Good point. Collective consciousness is all the surface stuff, what a society agrees on. The consensus reality, the trends, the fashionable ideas of the moment.
Like what everyone's talking about right now.
Exactly. Collective consciousness is what people think together. The collective unconscious is what the human species is together, fundamentally and across time.
Okay. And the whole point of this, the function, why does it matter?
Well, if we all share this deep layer, it means we share a kind of symbolic language. Jung thought this was the explanation for why you see the same incredibly complex themes popping up everywhere.
Like the hero's journey. Or flood myths.
Precisely. Showing up in ancient myths from cultures that had zero contact. How? For Jung, it wasn't diffusion. It was because the blueprint, the collective unconscious, was generating them independently from the same source.
That makes a strange kind of sense.
And this blueprint, it doesn't just sit there quietly. It actively influences how we behave, how we see the world. Jung believed people, especially when they're not very self-aware or under stress, end up sort of living out its symbols.
So these ancient patterns project themselves onto our modern lives.
Absolutely. Onto our relationships, our choices, our reactions. They're active.
Okay, this is where we need to dig into the actual components. You mentioned two main things, archetypes and instincts. Let's start with archetypes.
Right. Archetypes are the core content, you could say. But it's crucial to get this right. They aren't inherited images. You don't inherit a picture of the mother.
Okay, so what are they then?
They're inherited tendencies, or predispositions to perceive and react to the world in certain typical ways. Jung called them primordial images, or typical modes of apprehension. Think of them as empty forms that experience fills in.
Forms, waiting for content.
Sort of.
Yeah.
They belong to the absolute basic stock of the psyche. They developed over evolutionary time, phylogenetic time, way before any single individual exists.
Can you give an example? You mentioned the anima and animus earlier.
Yes, they're a great example. The animus, that's the sort of unconscious masculine principle within the female psyche. And the anima is the unconscious feminine principle within the male psyche.
So it's not just about gender roles we learn.
No. For Jung, these were fundamental inherited symbolic structures. They represent the interplay of these complementary energies throughout all of human history. It's built in. He really saw these structures as bridging that evolutionary history.
Right.
You can make the analogy with the body,
Oh.
Well, our bodies carry remnants of our evolutionary past, like the appendix, right? Useless now, but inherited. Jung argued the psyche does the same. It brings the mind of our unknown ancestors, these ancient structures, into our current consciousness.
Ah, so the mind, like the body, is a kind of museum of its evolutionary journey.
Exactly his point, a museum of phylogenetic history, both physically and psychically.
That's a really powerful image. And you see how flexible a single archetype can be. Let's take the mother archetype. That seems straightforward, but it's way bigger than just your actual mom, isn't it?
Oh, vastly bigger. Its core symbolic meaning revolves around things like protection, nourishment, fertility, the source.
So it gets projected everywhere.
Everywhere. Onto people, obviously mothers, grandmothers, maybe a caring nurse. But also onto concepts. Think about paradise or the kingdom of God, or Mother Church.
Places too.
Definitely. The earth itself, the sea, a forest, a cave, a walled garden, objects, a cornucopia, a fountain, a vessel, even abstract symbols.
Like a mandala. How does that fit?
Because the mandala, the circle, often symbolizes wholeness, containment, protection. It offers that sense of encompassing safety, which taps right into the core of the mother archetype. It's the unifying principle of nurturing safety, projected outward.
Amazing how one core idea branches out. Okay, what about the second component? Instincts.
Right, and they're totally intertwined with archetypes. Jung listed 5 main human instincts. He started with the most basic biological ones and moved towards the more, psychic ones.
Which are?
Hunger, sexuality,
Yeah.
then activity, the drive to do things, then reflection, the drive to think and contemplate, and finally creativity, the drive to make new things, to shape the world.
And how do these relate to archetypes in humans? Is it different from animals?
Yeah, he thought so. In animals, instinct is often quite rigid, very programmed. Think about birds building nests. Human instincts, he felt, are more like general drives. They strongly influence us, but there's a lot more freedom in how we express them.
And the archetype.
The archetype is almost like the psychic image, the symbolic pattern that emerges alongside the instinctual urge. It gives form to the drive.
Okay, I think I need a clearer picture of that link. You mentioned an analogy Jung used, something about a moth.
Ah, yes, the yucca moth. It's a fantastic, really specific example he used. This little moth has this incredibly complex instinctual behavior.
What does it do?
On just one night of its entire life, it instinctively knows this precise ritual. It collects pollen from a yucca flower, rolls it into a specific pellet shape.
Okay.
Then it flies to a different yucca plant, makes a hole in the plant's ovary, lays its egg inside, and then this is the amazing part. It climbs up and deliberately pollinates that flower with the pollen pellet it brought.
Wow. All on instinct. It just knows.
Exactly. It's a perfectly choreographed sequence, totally innate, programmed.
So how does that relate back to humans, archetypes, and instincts?
Well, Jung saw archetypes and instincts as originally being completely fused, like in the moth. Interdependent opposites, he called them. The pattern, archetype, and the drive, instinct, were one thing.
But in humans?
In humans, he believed, something changed. The archetypes became sort of elevated. They developed into a separate register of mental life, capable of conscious awareness, reflection, symbolism. We don't just act on instinct, we can symbolize the drive, reflect on it, create art about it. The archetype allows for that meaning-making layer on top of the raw instinct.
Right. That clarifies the connection. So if this whole structure, instincts, archetypes is inherited, how did Jung actually try to, prove it? He was a clinician, right, working with patients.
Primarily, yes. He spent decades looking for evidence in his patients' experiences, mainly through dream analysis, looking for those universal patterns in dreams, and also through active imagination.
Active imagination. What's that?
It's a technique where you consciously engage with your fantasies, like having a dialogue with figures from your unconscious while awake, exploring the inner landscape deliberately.
Interesting. But was there one specific piece of clinical evidence that really convinced him? The aha moment.
Absolutely. And the one that gets cited constantly is the Mithras liturgy case. It's probably the cornerstone of his early argument for the collective unconscious.
Okay, tell me about that.
Jung was working with a patient diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. This patient, who had no background in history or obscure mythology, started describing this very bizarre, very specific hallucination.
What did he see?
He said he looked at the sun, and hanging down from it was a kind of tube, like a phallus. And this tube was swinging back and forth, and its movement was what generated the wind.
Okay. That is incredibly specific and weird.
Extremely. Jung just noted it down at the time as part of the patient's psychosis. Didn't think much more of it.
Until
some time later, Jung happened to be reading a newly published academic translation of a text called the Mithras liturgy.
What's that?
It's an ancient Greco-Egyptian papyrus, part of the Greek magical papyri, likely connected to the mystery religion of Mithras. Very obscure stuff, especially back then, only recently deciphered and made available.
Don't leave me hanging.
And in this ancient obscure text, Jung found an exact description of his patient's hallucination. The text describes seeing a tube hanging down from the sun and states that its movement is the origin of the wind.
Wait, the exact same image. From a 2,000-year-old text the patient absolutely could not have seen.
Precisely. The text was brand new to scholarship. The patient had severe mental illness and was institutionalized. No way he encountered it.
That's more than just coincidence, isn't it?
That was Jung's absolute conviction. He concluded that neither the ancient priest who wrote the liturgy nor his schizophrenic patient invented that image independently.
So where did it come from?
It must have arisen spontaneously in both of them, centuries apart, from the same underlying universal inherited source, the collective unconscious.
Wow. Okay, I can see why that was a big moment for him.
It solidified his belief that mythology, ancient religions, even things like astrology, projecting symbolic figures onto the stars, weren't just quaint stories. They were projections, expressions of the collective unconscious trying to manifest itself.
So the collective unconscious is like this shared library of symbols that just keeps generating the same core ideas.
That's a good way to put it. And people have tried to test this idea, even though it's incredibly slippery, scientifically speaking. You mentioned a study, Rosen et al.
Yeah, from 1991. How on earth did they try to test something like inherited symbols in a lab?
Well, they moved away from grand myths and focused on basic cognitive processes like memory. They created something called an archetypal symbol inventory.
Okay.
They showed participants common, simple symbols like a circle, a square, a diamond, a triangle, and they paired these symbols with specific archetypal meanings drawn from Jungian theory. For instance, the diamond might be paired with the meaning self, the circle with wholeness, a snake with transformation, things like that.
Did the participants know these meanings?
No, that's the key. They had no conscious idea about the supposed Jungian meaning attached to each symbol. They just saw symbol word pairs. And the finding was pretty interesting. Subjects consistently showed better memory and recognition for the symbols when they were paired with their correct Jungian archetypal meaning.
Even if they didn't consciously know the meaning.
Exactly. Like, they'd remember the diamond shape better if it had been presented alongside the word self, its supposed archetype, than if it had been paired with some random word, even if the self connection seemed totally obscure to them consciously.
Huh. So that suggests, what, some kind of pre-existing resonance?
It suggests there might be a deeper cognitive fit or preference in our brains for these specific symbol meaning connections operating below the level of conscious awareness, a kind of pre-structuring.
That's definitely intriguing evidence, but
Yeah.
let's bring in the counter-argument, because this is where it gets really debated, isn't it? The whole issue of proof.
Oh, yeah. The major challenge.
The philosopher Karl Popper's ideas about science are relevant here, right? The falsifiability problem. Ray Scott Percival, a critic, really hammered Jung on this.
He did. Percival argued that Jung's biggest claims about the collective unconscious, especially the more metaphysical ones, simply aren't testable. You can't devise an experiment that could disprove them. And if you can't disprove something, Popper would say, it's not really scientific.
So it might be interesting philosophy, but not empirical science.
That's the critique. Jung insisted the collective unconscious was inherited, biological part of our nature.
But Percival and others push back on that leap, don't they? They say, okay, maybe there are common mental structures, common symbols across humanity,
Right.
but why do we need to invoke some mysterious inherited psychic layer? Couldn't it just be common environments, shared nurture rather than shared nature?
Explain that argument a bit more.
Well, think about it. Every single human being, everywhere, throughout history, experiences certain fundamental things. We all get hungry. We all need shelter. We all experience parents or caregivers. We all see the sun rise and set, experience night and day, the changing seasons.
Basic human condition stuff.
Exactly. So isn't it perfectly logical that all human minds grappling with these identical universal experiences would independently develop similar mental structures, similar symbols, similar stories to make sense of it all?
So we don't need inherited archetypes to explain why everyone has a mother figure concept, because everyone literally has some kind of mothering experience.
Right. We don't need ancestral psychic ghosts. We just need a gravity, biology, and the shared reality of being human on Earth. Seems like a much simpler explanation, doesn't it? Occam's razor, maybe?
It's a very powerful critique, and it's one analytical psychology constantly has to grapple with. The defense usually relies on the sheer specificity and complexity of some of the parallels.
Like the Mithras liturgy image?
Exactly. The common environment argument might explain broad themes why everyone cares about heroes or villains or mothers, but does it explain the spontaneous appearance of something as bizarre and specific as a sun phallus causing wind in completely disconnected contexts?
That's harder to explain away with just shared experience.
With Jung, the detail was the key. The intricate, often obscure nature of the symbols pointed beyond just common life experiences towards something deeper, something already structured, pre-programmed. But the debate definitely continues.
And this whole concept, it's not just about individual therapy, is it? Jung saw the collective unconscious playing out on a massive scale, in society, in politics.
Oh, hugely important for him. Because if we all share this unconscious layer, it means groups, societies, nations share it too, and that makes them incredibly vulnerable to political manipulations through symbols.
How so?
Jung was writing during the rise of fascism, remember? He was deeply disturbed by mass movements. He saw them as functioning like mass psychoses. Individuals in a crowd, he argued, can lose their personal consciousness, their critical thinking, and regress to this deeper collective level. They start channeling powerful, often primitive, unconscious symbolism archetypes through the mob mentality and through the figure of the charismatic leader.
So the leader taps into these ancient symbols to sway the masses.
Precisely. The leader becomes a hook for projections of the hero archetype, or the savior, or maybe the shadow. People stop thinking for themselves and become part of this mass man, swept along by unconscious currents. It was a terrifying prospect for him.
That really puts a different spin on political symbols and rhetoric. It also explains why Jung kept seeing these symbols pop up again and again, even when society thought it had moved past them. Like his analysis of UFOs.
Ah, yes, the flying saucers. That's a fascinating late work of his. He studied the whole phenomenon, the sightings, the rumors, the cultural impact, and he called it a living myth.
A living myth, meaning it wasn't necessarily real aliens, but something psychological.
He didn't really care if the objects themselves were physically real or not. What interested him was why people were seeing them and why they took that specific form. He argued that modern, rational, technological society tries to suppress these powerful ancient images from the collective unconscious, especially the old god images.
But they don't stay suppressed.
No, they inevitably find a way to resurface, but they come back in a modern disguise. In this case, a technological one, the flying saucer.
And the shape was important to him, wasn't it? The roundness.
Absolutely critical. The circle or sphere is perhaps the most universal symbol of wholeness, integration, completion. It's the symbol of the self-archetype, the totality of the psyche.
So seeing these round objects in the sky was the psyche demanding wholeness.
Exactly. Jung saw it as a compensatory sign. Our modern world felt increasingly fragmented, split-minded, as he put it. The psyche, seeking balance, spontaneously projected this ancient symbol of unity and totality onto the heavens, onto these mysterious objects. It was a collective dream, a modern myth expressing an ancient need.
That's a really different way to look at something like UFOs. Okay, so we've seen the theory, the evidence, the critiques, the social implications. How does this all get used in actual therapy? What's the goal?
Well, in analytical psychology, a big part of the work is engaging directly with these unconscious forces, these archetypes, as they manifest in a person's life.
Manifest how? Like in projections onto people.
Exactly. A major goal is to help the patient differentiate the archetype from the real person carrying the projection, to sort of peel the symbol off the individual.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Let's say you have an incredibly difficult, overpowering relationship with your father. He seems like this absolute tyrant. In therapy, you might explore how much of that reaction is purely about him, the actual man, and how much is an unconscious projection of the powerful tyrannical progenitor archetype onto him.
Ah, so you're reacting not just to Dad, but to this ancient inherited image of the scary father figure.
Precisely. And by recognizing that archetypal energy, by understanding its impersonal collective nature, you can start to disentangle it from your personal relationship with your actual father. You see him more clearly as just a human being.
And that leads to healthier relationships.
That's the aim. Less unconscious projection, more conscious relating. It takes the overwhelming charge out of it sometimes.
Okay, so wrapping this all up, it feels like there are fundamentally two ways people tend to view the collective unconscious, even among Jungians, a kind of basic version and a more cosmic one.
That's a good way to put it. Scholars often talk about a minimalist versus a maximalist interpretation.
What's the minimalist take?
The minimalist view stays closer to biology and clinical observation. It sees the collective unconscious simply as a set of inherited, species-specific psychological structures, basic predispositions, like the psychological equivalent of us all inheriting the basic bone structure of an arm.
So just the fundamental wiring we all share because we're human.
Pretty much. Enabling common behaviors, common ways of perceiving the world, it's the collective arm analogy. We all have the same basic mental toolkit.
And the maximalist view.
That's the interpretation Jung himself seemed increasingly drawn to, especially later in life. It embraces the more numinous, even mystical quality of these experiences. Meaning it sees the archetypes and the collective unconscious not just as biological structures, but as potential evidence of something more, a connection maybe to a larger reality, a divine mind, or a world soul, the anima mundi. It suggests a level of psychic reality that transcends the individual and connects us all in a more profound, perhaps even spiritual way.
So that view really leans into the metaphysical possibilities.
It does. It takes the universality of these psychic patterns as hinting at a deeper, unified consciousness underlying everything.
So Jung really left us with this revolutionary and kind of challenging concept, this idea that we carry the whole psychic history of our species within us. It's clinical, it's psychological, but it pushes right up against philosophy and metaphysics.
Absolutely. It forces you to question how much of your own inner world, your dreams, your attractions, your fears, is truly yours, and how much is the echo of millennia of human experience.
Right. So as you, our listener, reflect on this deep dive, here's something to maybe chew on, building on what we've discussed. Jung argued these archetypes are constantly shaping how you see the world, how you react emotionally, even how you respond politically. So the question for you is, when you encounter a really powerful symbol, maybe a national flag, a religious icon, maybe even just a shape, or when you feel this sudden, overwhelming, almost inexplicable emotional connection or repulsion towards someone, are you just having a unique personal reaction?
Whoa.
Or are you maybe unknowingly tapping into and channeling the ancient psychic life of the past? Which parts of your own life, your relationships, your strong reactions, might actually be you living out one of these incredibly old, inherited, universal symbols without even realizing it?
It's a profound question to ask yourself.
Definitely something to think about. Thank you for joining us as we explore the depths of Jung's inherited mind. We really encourage you to dig into the sources yourself and keep exploring these ideas. Until next time.